Johnson threads the pass inside, and Angel Reese finishes through contact.
Strong.
Physical. Dominant.
And one.
That's the version of Angel Reese the world was supposed to believe in. But what happened next didn't just surprise Chicago. It shook the entire league. Angel Reese didn't quietly exit the Chicago sky. She didn't fade into the background or get moved in some slow, drawn-out negotiation.
No.
This was fast.
Sudden.
Almost surgical. A two-time All-Star. One of the most dominant rebounders in the WNBA. A player whose stat sheet screamed franchise cornerstone. And she was traded for future picks. Not a superstar in return. Not a rising young talent. Not even a bidding war. Just picks. Draft capital that won't even touch a basketball court for years. That alone should have raised eyebrows. But what happened immediately after? That's when things got uncomfortable. Because the moment Angel Reese was gone,
Chicago changed.
Overnight. A franchise that players once hesitated to join suddenly became a destination.
Not a maybe.
Not a backup option. A destination. And the names didn't trickle in. They flooded in. Veterans. Proven winners. High-level talent. Players who understand exactly what winning environments look like and what to avoid. They signed quickly. Confidently. Without hesitation. So now the question isn't what Chicago gave up. The real question is, what did the entire league believe about Chicago the second Angel Reese was no longer part of it? On paper, Angel Reese looked like everything you build around. The numbers were loud. Double-doubles stacking up like clockwork. Rebounding dominance that led the entire league. Historic streaks that put her name next to legends. Nearly 13 rebounds per game. Back-to-back All-Star selections. A rookie season that had analysts talking about generational impact. If you only looked at the stats, you'd think Chicago was one move away from contention. But the wins never came. Not once did the numbers translate into success. Year 1, 13 wins. Year 2, 10 wins. That's not growth. That's regression. A combined record of 23-61. A 27% win rate. And suddenly, those eye-popping numbers started to feel misleading. Because when you looked closer, the dominance wasn't as clean as it seemed. A significant portion of her offensive rebounds came from her own missed shots. Mississippi rebound. Miss again. Rebound again. Statistically, it counts the same. But impact-wise? It tells a completely different story. Her efficiency exposed the gap. Low shooting percentages. Struggles finishing at the rim, where she operated the most. A limited perimeter game. Turnovers climbing to one of the worst rates in the league. Yes, she was producing, but she wasn't elevating. And that's the difference between a star and a franchise leader. But even that wasn't the real breaking point. Because teams can survive inefficiency. They can develop skill. They can adjust systems. What they cannot survive is a broken locker room. And that's where everything began to unravel. Quietly at first. Then all at once. Tension started building behind closed doors. Frustrations that didn't stay contained. Comments that didn't stay private. Veterans, players who built their reputations on leadership and winning, found themselves in an environment that no longer felt stable. And when respect disappears in a locker room, everything follows. There were reports of clashes. Moments where lines were crossed, situations that escalated instead of being resolved. And then came the turning point. A respected veteran, someone who had won championships, someone who had earned every ounce of credibility, became the subject of public criticism. Not whispered, not handled internally.
Public.
And that changes everything. Because once trust is broken in front of the team, it doesn't come back the same. Then came visible frustration on the court. Body language that couldn't be ignored. Energy that dropped. Moments where players looked disconnected, not just from the game, but from each other. At one point, it became so obvious it went viral. That's when you know it's no longer contained. That's when you know it's bigger than basketball. And then the suspension. Teams don't suspend stars lightly. That's the last resort. That's what happens after conversations fail. After warnings don't work. After internal fixes collapse. It's the organization saying, we can't manage this anymore. By that point, it wasn't just performance. It was culture. And culture always wins. Or destroys. Then came the reports that made everything hit harder. Teammates speaking out. Frustration going public. Words that rarely get used in professional sports suddenly being attached to the situation. That's not normal. Players protect each other. They don't break that code unless something has gone seriously wrong. And when they do, it means the damage ran deep. Meanwhile, the front office was watching everything unfold. The losses, the tension, the disconnect between stats and results. And they reached a conclusion most teams try to avoid. The numbers and the reality could not coexist anymore. So they made a decision. Not a slow one. Not a cautious one. A decisive one. Trade her. And not for immediate help. For the future. Because in that moment, the future mattered more than the present. The official explanation? Roster balance. But everyone understands what that really means. It means this wasn't working. And more importantly, it wasn't going to work. And then came the part that made everything undeniable. Relief. Not speculation. Not rumors. Relief. Inside the organization. Inside the locker room. The kind of relief that doesn't need explanation. Because it shows itself in what happens next. And what happened next?
Players came. Quickly.
Willingly.
Confidently.
The same franchise that struggled to attract talent suddenly had no problem doing it. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when something changes. Or when something is removed. Angel Reese moved on. A new city. A new chapter. A fresh start. And for her, this is now about proving something. Because the narrative has shifted. It's no longer about potential. It's about impact. It's about whether everything we saw on paper can finally translate into winning. Because in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Not rebounds. Not highlights. Not headlines. Winning. And now, with the entire league watching closer than ever, we're about to find out the truth. That narrative? It lasted exactly as long as Angel Reese was in Chicago. The moment she was gone, everything changed. And not slowly. Not gradually. Not in phases. Instantly. The relief inside the organization wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. It was the kind of shift that doesn't just affect mood, it unlocks action. Decisions that had been sitting on hold for months suddenly moved forward. Calls that couldn't be made before were made immediately. It was like a door had been closed for 2 years, and the second it opened, everything rushed through at once. And then came a move that said more than any press release ever could. Chicago gave Angel Reese's number. Just gave it away. Handed it directly to Rickea Jackson. No ceremony. No hesitation. No pause.
Just gone.
And while fans online exploded, demanding jersey retirements, calling it disrespectful, insisting her legacy should be honored, the reality was much colder. Jersey retirements are earned through championships. Through deep playoff runs. Through moments that define a franchise. Chicago's record during Reese's era? 13-27. Then 10-34. There was nothing to immortalize. So the organization didn't hesitate. They didn't just move on from the player. They erased the chapter.
Name.
Number. Identity. All replaced. And they did it so fast it didn't feel like a rebuild. It felt like an exorcism. What followed next was almost uncomfortable to watch. Because it didn't look normal. It looked like a team that had been waiting. Waiting for the exact moment they could finally become what they were supposed to be. Within days, just days, Chicago transformed. Not with minor tweaks. With a complete overhaul. A franchise that had spent 2 seasons stuck at the bottom of the standings suddenly started moving like a contender. And the biggest sign? Skylar Diggins chose them. One of the most respected point guards in the history of the league. A proven leader. A player who understands winning at the highest level.
She didn't hesitate.
She signed. And when she spoke, she said something that cut deeper than it seemed on the surface. She knew the vision. Before everyone else did.
Think about that.
That means Chicago had a plan all along. They just couldn't execute it until something changed. Or someone was removed. Then Azura Stevens returned. A champion. A player who had already experienced success in Chicago and left. She came back.
Confidently.
Willingly. That doesn't happen unless the environment has completely shifted. Then came Dejonai Carrington. Elite defender. Relentless energy. The type of player every serious team needs. She joined too. And then Rickea Jackson. One of the most dynamic young scorers in the game. Acquired without even giving up a first-round pick. That alone shocked people around the league. Because suddenly, Chicago wasn't negotiating from weakness anymore. They had leverage. They had direction. They had appeal. The moves kept coming. Depth pieces. Draft talent. Smart signings. In the span of just over a week, Chicago went from one of the worst teams in the league to a roster analysts were calling playoff ready. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen randomly. It happens when something that was holding everything back is no longer there. And when you look at the new core, one detail stands out above everything else. Every player fits. Every player elevates others. Every player contributes to winning basketball, not just individual stats. Defense, versatility,
Chemistry.
the exact things that had been missing, the exact things that suddenly appeared. And here's where it becomes impossible to ignore. For 2 years, Chicago struggled to attract talent. Free agents avoided them. Top players stayed away. The phone didn't ring. Then suddenly, it wouldn't stop ringing. That's not coincidence. That's a verdict. A silent one, but a clear one. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, things weren't unfolding the same way. On paper, the roster looked promising. Strong pieces. Talented players. A team that should compete. But free agency told a different story. Because while Chicago was gaining momentum, Atlanta was losing it. Players talked. Agents talked. Information moved the way it always does in professional sports. Quietly, quickly, and without headlines. And the result? Some players chose not to come. Not because of money. Not because of location. But because of situation. Because of fit. Because of what they believed the environment would be. And then came the moment that made everything louder. Brittany Griner left. A champion. An MVP. One of the most dominant players the league has ever seen. She looked at the direction of the roster and chose to go elsewhere. That decision didn't need explanation. It spoke for itself. Angel Reese, now in Atlanta, reportedly grew frustrated.
Confused.
Wondering why free agents weren't lining up to join her. But the answer had already been written. Not in interviews. Not in statements. In actions. In decisions. In silence. And when you compare situations across the league, the contrast becomes even sharper. Look at Indiana. When Caitlin Clark arrived, the Fever were at the bottom. Worst record. No momentum. No expectations. And within one season, playoff team. Because her impact wasn't just statistical. It was transformational. She changed how defenses reacted. She created space for teammates. She elevated everyone around her. She didn't just produce. She made the entire system better. And that's the difference between a player who fills a stat sheet and a player who changes a franchise. Chicago is moving forward. Atlanta is trying to figure things out. And Angel Reese is now at the center of a question that isn't going away. Because this was never just about numbers.
It was about impact.
About culture. About what happens when talent doesn't translate into winning or into trust. And now the story isn't over. It's just shifted. Because reputations don't disappear with a trade. They follow. Quietly. Everywhere. So now the real test begins. Was Chicago's transformation proof of what they believed all along? Or will Atlanta prove something different? Because eventually, these paths are going to cross again. And when they do, there won't be any more speculation. No more rumors. No more quiet conversations behind the scenes. Just the truth. On the court, where everything gets exposed. What makes this entire situation even more unsettling is not just how quickly Chicago improved, but how clearly the league reacted without ever needing to say anything publicly. There was no official statement from players warning others. No interviews where stars openly criticized the situation. And yet, the message traveled faster than any headline ever could. In professional sports, reputation doesn't move through press conferences. It moves through private conversations, locker room whispers, and the kind of honesty players only share with each other when cameras aren't around. And whatever was being said about Chicago before the trade completely disappeared the moment Angel Reese was no longer part of that environment. That kind of silence turning into action is one of the loudest signals you will ever see in sports because it means the entire league reached the same conclusion at the same time without needing to coordinate it. At the same time, what's happening in Atlanta feels like the exact opposite kind of energy. On the surface, everything looks fine. The roster still has talent. The names still carry weight. The expectations, at least publicly, haven't collapsed. But underneath that surface, there's a different kind of tension building, the kind that doesn't show up immediately in wins and losses, but starts revealing itself in smaller ways. In hesitation. In chemistry. In the way players interact during games. Because when free agents hesitate to join a team, it doesn't just affect the roster. It affects confidence. It affects belief. It creates a situation where the players already there start asking quiet questions. Why didn't others want to come here? What are we missing? And those questions, once they start forming, don't go away easily. What makes this even more complicated is that Angel Reese now finds herself in a position she has never been in before. For the first time in her career, she's not being evaluated based on potential or hype. She's being evaluated based on perception across the league. Not what fans think, not what social media says, but what other players believe. And that's a completely different standard. Because players don't care about highlight clips or stat lines in isolation. They care about what it feels like to share a court with someone. They care about trust, communication, accountability, and whether a teammate makes their job easier or harder. And right now, whether fair or not, that perception is being tested in real time. Meanwhile, Chicago's transformation continues to echo across the league like a case study in how quickly things can change when the right pieces fall into place. The system they are building isn't centered around one dominant personality anymore. It's built on balance, structure, and cohesion. Every player added to that roster brings something specific that fits into a larger vision. There's a clear identity forming, one that prioritizes movement, spacing, defensive intensity, and shared responsibility. And when players see that kind of clarity, they respond to it. They trust it. Because it gives them something every professional athlete values above almost anything else. Stability. A system where they know their role, understand the direction, and believe that everyone is pulling in the same direction. And that's where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Because while Chicago is building something that looks increasingly stable and attractive, Atlanta is entering a phase filled with uncertainty. Not because they lack talent, but because they haven't yet answered the most important question any team has to answer. What is their identity now? Are they still the same team that dominated the regular season before? Or are they something entirely different? And if they are different, is that change actually making them better or just more complicated? These are the kinds of questions that don't get answered in press releases or early season optimism. They get answered under pressure, in close games, in moments where chemistry matters more than talent. At the center of all of this is Angel Reese, and the reality that this next chapter of her career is no longer about proving she can put up numbers. That part has already been established. What she has to prove now is something far more difficult, that her presence leads to winning, that her leadership builds rather than divides, and that whatever followed her out of Chicago doesn't follow her into Atlanta. Because in professional sports, narratives don't disappear, they evolve. And right now, her narrative is at a crossroads where every game, every interaction, every result is being watched through a different lens than before. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth in all of this is that the league isn't waiting for a long-term answer. It's already forming opinions in real time. Every missed opportunity, every visible frustration, every sign of disconnect adds another layer to a story that is still being written but already feels like it's heading in a specific direction. At the same time, every moment of success, every sign of cohesion, every indication that Atlanta is working as a unit has the power to shift that narrative just as quickly as it formed. That's the pressure of this situation. It's not just about performance anymore. It's about perception catching up to reality, one way or the other. Because eventually, all of this builds towards something unavoidable. A moment where the noise fades, the speculation disappears, and the only thing left is competition. When Chicago and Atlanta face each other, it won't just be another game on the schedule. It will feel like a collision between two completely different interpretations of the same story. One team moving forward after a dramatic